3P does not stand for 3 Prime Ministers in the past year, but rather for pre-fragmented, programmable, and proximity fused, which is precisely what the ammunition I'm going to be talking about today is. 3P ammunition is for naval guns. It's made by BAE Systems Bofors, for BAE Systems Bofors. It's made for the Bofors 40mm Mark IV and 57mm naval gun, meaning it's basically available in 2 variants, one for each gun, one for each caliber. Although it depends on the situation, they are pretty much the same thing. That is to say, they carry out the same function and they have the same capability. 3P is pretty well known in the munitions world, not only because it's used with some of the most well-known guns made by BAE, that being the Mark IV 40mm and the 57mm, but because it's used by some of the most high-ranking navies on the planet. It is incredibly well recognized, it's incredibly highly used, it's incredibly highly respected because of its adaptability to the situation and the fact that it really typifies the new age shell in a naval context that can do more than just surface attack and bombardment. Now, the ammunition, what makes it so special in a lot of contexts, is that the ammunition has 6 modes, making it really quite versatile. So this is where the programmability comes into it. The round can be programmed prior to launch with one of 6 modes, whichever is the best for the situation. And here are the 6 modes. So it's either gated proximity mode for general air defense. This is against smaller air threats, something that makes 3P something that's particularly special because you can take out drones. In naval context, again, that's particularly ISR drones, but it means you can actually take out smaller threats with a conventional naval round at range. The second is a gated proximity mode with impact priority. That is to say that for larger targets where you can be more sure of a hit, the shell detonates not before it hits the target, but once it has hit the target. Gated proximity mode with impact priority. It wants to hit the target, and once it hits the target, it blows it to kingdom come. So this is for larger targets like planes and probably more likely helicopters. Thirdly, time mode. It's designed for, I guess you'd say, more often than not, it's hitting incoming fast boats. The time fuse means that the shell can explode prior to the impact with the water. You can effectively get very precise measurements of what point detonation needs to occur, and this can lead to very accurate strikes on more maneuverable targets or hidden/obscure onshore targets. Now, there is also the impact mode, which is for larger surface targets. This is the sort of typical thing you'd expect for surface warfare in a naval context. That is, it's just hitting other ships. Fifth is the armor piercing mode for more armored surface targets. And finally, proximity mode, which is pretty much what it says on the tin, and the hallmark of 3P, it's the third P. And that is the default mode. That is to say, once it gets close enough, it blows up. Furthermore, the round is pre-fragmented. This is our third P. Not only is it proximity fused, or our second P if you do it in order, it's not only programmable, it's not only proximity fused, but it's pre-fragmented. This is important. For a lot of conventional naval rounds, the explosion itself causes a lined casing excuse me, to shatter, and blasts the fragments from that shattering outwards. In shells, this usually expends around 20 to 25% of the energy from the explosion itself. In missiles, it's slightly more. Now, in this case, you have reduced energy expenditure on the breaking of the casing. You don't have to actually fragment anything, and thus you have more energy expended on sending these tungsten fragments, which are already there, outwards and outward toward the target. And this is also pretty useful because it means that you can use stronger, harder, heavier materials, because the initial explosion doesn't have to shatter the material, and it can just put all its energy into actually transporting heavier materials. And yes, I know that generally for warhead construction there are often composite weak points used to aid fragmentation, but you know exactly what I mean. In short, there is arguably better fragmentation expulsion effects, that is to say, it explodes better, harder, and with more force, because the material itself is pre-fragmented. This also leads often to better spread. If you're taking out drones, it means that you're more likely to get hit because there is more spread, particularly on a proximity basis, a more wide spread of these fragments. Now, 3P is particularly good as well because, as we've said, it does anything that might be needed within this adaptable mode system, but also it can do it uninterrupted. That is, that it has the ability to perform all of the aforementioned functions alongside airburst capability, incredibly useful, all made better by the fact that it is immune to electronic countermeasures, because it's a closed system of target programming and designation, and mode designation. And additionally, you can also say that it's particularly useful even over really long distances because of the ability to maintain fuse triggering distances even when the target is really, really far away. Something else that makes it particularly good is that it utilizes PBX for explosive and LOVA for propellant. For those of you who don't know, PBX is sort of stable explosive powder. It's explosives on long chain polymer plastics, and LOVA is sort of, it's based on thermoplastic elastomer, which is, it dictates that you don't really need nitroglycerin, as you did before. You don't need that much nitrocellulose, and you can include nitramines, all of which makes it more stable. And all of that is bound up and tied off nicely in a bow with a nice polymer-bound matrix. This means that because you have stable PBX and stable LOVA, that the munition is insensitive. And that means that if it gets shot down, if it gets intercepted, if it gets hit by a missile, if it gets hit by a round, it doesn't explode. And this aids another great feature of it, the fact that it can reduce collateral damage by the fact that it is an insensitive munition. It has high precision with incredibly localized effects. It ideally can use this precision to actually hit the target, and doesn't necessarily require or rely upon fragmentation to hit larger targets, as a lot of other rounds do. And of course, the insensitive nature means that you don't put any of your own guys or your own vehicles at risk, because there's lower likelihood of blue on blue if it's hit at an early stage. In regard to basic specifications, the 40mm round is 534.4 millimeters long, the 57mm round is 675.3 millimeters long, and they have muzzle velocities respectively of 1012 meters per second and 1035, so fairly typical as you would expect. Here's what I'd say. It's particularly impressive, 3P, with each munition being individually designated and programmed to perform any function. Each unit can take out missiles, it can take out drones, it can take out planes, helicopters, normal surface targets, armored surface targets, fast boats, inland targets, battery targets, shore-based targets. It can detonate before hitting, as it's hitting, potentially after moving past a target. It can hit from the front, the side, all sorts. I guess it promotes power via pre-fragmentation. It's got plentiful performance potential via programmability and precision potency via proximity fusing. Did I also mention that while magazines are less than 100, you can fire 300 rounds of it per minute? Do give it a look. It's incredibly well recognized, it's incredibly potent, it's incredibly adaptable, and as I say, it really typifies this new age naval ammunition which has more than one use. It's not purely conventional, and it's smarter ammunition that can be used instead of missiles for a more cost-effective solution if need be. Potentially even as close-in weapon systems. So do give it a look. It's incredibly well respected.